Wait, the writer who won a massive defamation case against Donald Trump is not the one being investigated. The billionaire who quietly helped fund her lawsuit might be. That is the buried twist in this whole story, and once you see it, the entire narrative flips. Here is what just came out of the Trump Justice Department, and why it matters more than the headlines are letting on. The DOJ has clarified on the record that E. Jean Carroll herself is not the target of any investigation. That alone should stop you in your tracks. Because if you have been following cable news for the last few weeks, you would have sworn the opposite was true. You would have heard her name attached to phrases like criminal referral and retribution and payback. But the actual posture from the department tells a very different story. Carroll is not under investigation. Reid Hoffman might be, and that single sentence reframes everything. So let me walk you through why. Reid Hoffman is the LinkedIn co-founder, a billionaire, and one of the largest Democratic donors in the country. He is not a household name the way Soros or Bloomberg are, but inside political fundraising circles, he is a heavyweight, and he was a financial backer of the Carroll litigation against Trump. That is not a secret. It has been reported in the open for a long time. What is new is the suggestion that the funding itself, not the lawsuit, not the verdict, not the plaintiff, could become a legal question. Do you see the distinction? Because most of the coverage is collapsing it on purpose. There is a world of difference between investigating the woman who brought a civil claim and investigating the billionaire who bankrolled it. One is the kind of move that would set off every alarm bell in the country about weaponized prosecution. The other is a far narrower question about third-party litigation finance and whether any laws were crossed and how that money flowed. Those are not the same thing. They are not even in the same neighborhood, and yet the public conversation has been treating them as if they are. So why the confusion? Part of it is that lawfare has become one of those words that does too much work. It gets used to describe everything from prosecutorial overreach to ordinary civil litigation you happen to dislike. And when a term means everything, it ends up meaning nothing. The result is a fog where serious distinctions disappear and where both sides can shout past each other without ever actually disagreeing on the facts. Let me give you the facts as they currently sit. Fact 1. E. Jean Carroll sued Donald Trump in civil court. She won. A jury found in her favor. That verdict stands. Fact 2. Reid Hoffman provided financial support that helped make that lawsuit possible. He has acknowledged this publicly. Litigation finance from wealthy donors is not by itself illegal. It happens on the left and the right. Peter Thiel famously funded the Hulk Hogan lawsuit that ended Gawker. That was legal. Controversial, but legal. Fact 3. The Trump Justice Department has now stated that Carroll is not being investigated. That is a meaningful clarification because rumors had been swirling that she was. Fact 4. The same department has signaled that Hoffman's role, specifically the funding side, may be under review. So what is actually being asked here? It is not whether Carroll's claims were legitimate. The court's already answered that. It is whether the mechanism by which her lawsuit was financed crosses any legal lines. And that is a much narrower, much more technical question than the political theater would suggest. Now here's where it gets interesting. Because the political incentives on both sides are pushing hard against clarity, if you are a Trump supporter, the temptation is to frame this as the system finally being held accountable, to treat any investigation of Hoffman as proof that the original lawsuit was tainted. But that is not what a Hoffman inquiry would establish. Even if it went forward, it would only address the funding question. It would not undo the verdict. It would not retroactively make Carroll's claims invalid. If you are a Trump critic, the temptation is to frame any movement against Hoffman as pure retaliation, to argue that the administration is using the Justice Department to punish a political opponent through a proxy. And there is a version of that concern that is legitimate and worth taking seriously. But it gets weaker if the underlying legal questions about litigation finance are actually real questions with actual answers. So which is it? The honest answer is that you do not know yet, and neither does anyone shouting on television. What you do know is this: the DOJ took the trouble to specifically clarify that Carroll is not a target. That is not nothing. In an environment where every action is assumed to be political, that kind of public narrowing matters. It suggests that someone at the department understood the optics of going after the plaintiff herself would be catastrophic and chose not to do it. That is a choice. And choices in politics tell you something. It tells you that the line being drawn, at least for now, is between the litigant and the funder, between the person who brought the claim and the person who paid for the lawyers. Whether that line holds and whether it can survive serious legal scrutiny is the real story to watch. Because here is the broader pattern you should be paying attention to. Third-party litigation finance has exploded over the last decade. Hedge funds, billionaires, advocacy groups, foreign entities in some cases, all of them pouring money into lawsuits as a strategy, sometimes for profit, sometimes for politics, sometimes for revenge. and the legal framework around it has not caught up. There are real questions about disclosure, about influence, about whether the people funding lawsuits should have to identify themselves the way campaign donors do. Those questions exist regardless of who is in the White House. They existed before Trump. They will exist after Trump. And whatever happens with Hoffman specifically, the underlying issue is not going away. So when you see the next round of headlines about this story, ask yourself a sharper set of questions. Is the coverage distinguishing between Carroll and Hoffman or blurring them together? Is it treating the funding question as a real legal issue or just as a political weapon? Is it acknowledging that litigation finance is a genuinely unsettled area of law or pretending the answer is obvious? Because the answer is not obvious, and anyone telling you it is, on either side, is selling you something. The thing about buried stories is that they usually get buried for a reason. Sometimes the reason is conspiracy. More often, the reason is that the truth is more complicated than the narrative anyone wants to sell you. This is one of those cases. The simple version, the one that fits in a chyron, is that the Trump administration is going after E. Jean Carroll. The actual version, the one the DOJ itself just clarified, is that they are not. They are looking at the money behind the lawsuit. That is a different story. A smaller story in some ways, a bigger one in others, and it deserves to be told accurately. So the next time someone tells you what is really going on with the Carroll case, ask them one question. Are you talking about Carroll or are you talking about Hoffman? Because if they cannot answer that cleanly, they are not telling you the story. They are telling you a version of it that serves their side. The truth, as usual, is hiding in the distinction nobody wants to make.